Chapter 5. Lies. Martin waited outside for the cab he knew would come. It was freezing cold, but he couldn't imagine going back into the institute to wait. He was sure he smelled like sex, and while that didn't normally bother him, he found it distressing right now. He could only hope John would be asleep when he got home so he wouldn't have to face him and explain away his scent, or why he was gone so late into the night. The ride home was uncomfortable and uneventful. He left a spot on the cab seat and told the driver to put the cleaning charge on the card he used to pay before he went inside. Cleanup was the least Peter could do for him. John had passed out on the couch, and while Martin would normally turn off the telly and help him to bed, he just wanted a shower right now. He went directly to the bathroom and stood under the spray for as long as he could manage, long after the hot water ran cold. He only stepped out because he was likely to give himself a chill if he stayed. He dried off and let out a sigh. At least he felt more like himself now. Martin wrapped up in the warmest pajamas he had and grabbed his slippers. His hair still wet made him shiver, but he felt marginally better. All he needed now was cuppa, and he would be all right. When he went into the kitchen, he found John sitting straight up on the couch. "Easy, John. It's just me. I'm home." "Martin, what time is it?" "About 1 in the morning. Did I wake you? You're home late. What kind of job keeps you until 1 in the morning?" Martin shot John a look that he couldn't see. "You have no room to talk. You had a cot in the back room by your office because you would stay so late you would pass out at your desk. For all intents and purposes, you lived in the archives. I'm allowed a little overtime." "I understand that, but not many jobs are like the archives. I'm just worried. This wouldn't be the first time recently that you've acted recklessly. What are you doing, Martin?" "You don't get to lecture me about recklessness, Jonathan Sims. I didn't gouge my eyes out without telling anyone first." Martin saw John flinch and lower his head. "But I did tell someone," he muttered under his breath. He knew taking his frustrations out on John wasn't fair. He was just worried, but God, he was in a foul mood now and just wanted his tea. After a moment, he sighed. Watching John sulk on the couch was all but pitiful. "How is the rest of Hamilton?" "There isn't a happy ending, if that's what you're asking. It's quite bittersweet, but the music was superb. I was able to play out the scenes in my mind. I rather enjoyed myself. Thank you for setting it up for me. I ended up watching it a second time just for how good it was, and well, I could only find the enter button on the remote. It's not as though I could have turned on anything else." Martin felt a wave of guilt wash over him. John was accepting the olive branch, but he still felt bad for brushing off his concern. "Would you like some tea?" John looked thoughtful before turning Martin's direction. "Do you have honey?" Martin smiled and made John's cup with honey in it. He approached and watched as John scooted over on the couch to make room for him. He pressed the mug into John's hand and sighed. "I'm sorry for going off on you. It's been a stressful evening. I don't want to talk about it, but I appreciate your concern over me." "John, you don't need to worry about me. I know what I'm doing." "Just tell me one thing, then I will stop worrying. I promise I won't ask any more questions or comment about you being out late." "I'm listening." "Did you leave?" Martin hesitated for a moment. It was the moment of truth. He could come clean right now and tell John everything, and no, he couldn't do that. One look at John's bandaged eyes threw that out the window. He was going to protect John. That meant protecting him from his terrible decisions as well. "I'm not an archival assistant anymore." John didn't look convinced, but he dropped it, as promised, and leaned sideways until he was pressed against Martin's side. "Okay. Please be careful." Neither of them spoke after that. They sat silently, listening to the clock's tick, only the sound of their sipping at their cups of tea to fill the silence. Elias brought in 2 more archival assistants over the next week. 2 women who seemed to make it their life's goal to get Terry a date. The main issue was that it was very clear that Terry had a crush on Elias. All in all, it was an HR suit waiting to happen, and a headache was already blossoming behind Martin's eyes. The group reminded him of how things used to be in a way that gripped his heart painfully and squeezed. He could see bits and pieces of his old friends in the new assistants, and it made him ache in a way that bit down into his bones and sucked the marrow from within them. Margaret Caminash hated her name. She insisted on being called Maggie. She was a spirited woman who had moved with her family to England when she was 10. She still retained some of her southwestern American accent, and it showed most frequently when she was excited or angry. She was a bundle of sunshine that lit up any room she walked into with her bouncing ginger curls and bright blue eyes. She was dark-skinned and when prompted had said her mother was white and her father was a mix of Native American and Mexican. Sometimes Martin would catch her speaking Spanish under her breath. She always looked surprised when she was caught. She had more charisma than she had any right to, and when she casually bumped her hips against Martin with a grin, all he could think about was Tim's brown eyes and charming smile. He had retreated to his office without his tea. The other new addition was a young woman named Sarah Reed, who seemed to have taken to Maggie like a moth to fire. She was a calm brunette with long hair to the small of her back that she tended to wear half back with an expensive-looking barrette. She was apparently the daughter of a well-off family who had been invested in by the Magnus Institute, and when offered a job by Elias, her family had pressured her into it. Martin couldn't understand why she chose to work in the archives when she was offered a position in the business management department, but he felt it was rude to ask, so he didn't. Either way, he felt she was the greatest threat. She reminded him a little too much of Basira, all about facts and resources, but with Sasha's ability to get into nearly any database with practiced ease. She was an incredible researcher and had earned her degree in computer sciences with a minor in business. He had seen her take apart one of the archive's computers and put it back together in a matter of minutes. She was as impressive an addition as she was scary. Martin thinks that Gertrude would have liked her no-nonsense personality. Terry seemed like the weak link of the group at the moment, and Martin realized now who he recognized in the male. He looked at Terry and saw himself. He pondered mildly at how much had happened to turn him from someone like Terry into who he was now, and felt that innocence and joy he heard in the bullpen couldn't last. He just hoped that the archive wouldn't claim any more victims from these new faces. Work was going slow, seeing as the assistants were new to all this, and Martin was still unsure of how to be an archivist. He wondered idly if this was how John had felt post-promotion, absolutely unsure of any move he made and nearly paralyzed with the fear of mucking up spectacularly due to his own incompetence. Martin rather disliked that feeling. There was a knock at the door. "Mr. Blackwood, I brought you some tea." It was odd, having the shoe on the other foot. Not so long ago he was doing the same thing for John. He couldn't get over the feeling of being an imposter, that this wasn't his office. He was taking John's space and he didn't deserve it. Although it's not as though he'd been given a choice. "Oh, well, thank you, Terry, and please call me Martin." He internally questions how old Terry was. He looked quite young, perhaps from a baby face round with a little chub left in the cheeks and big expressive hazel eyes. Terry shifted from one foot to the other and placed the cow mug on the desk. "Mr. Martin, how long have you been here?" "Been about 9 years now. Why?" "Have you been in the archives the whole time?" "No, I started off working in the library before I was transferred down to the archives. Until recently I was an archival assistant like you. What's brought all this on?" "Well, I just couldn't help but notice that everyone but you suddenly left, and I overheard some people in another department say that the last archivist left in an ambulance in critical condition, and the one before him was murdered. I've been looking into things, and I've found out the archives is under attack, a lot. And when I went down into artifact storage, I heard something singing, calling out to me, and I told you not to go into artifact storage alone!" Terry startled, taking a step back. I wasn't alone. Sarah was with me, but she said she didn't hear anything, just me." Martin calmed and sighed. "Sorry for shouting. All right. What's your real question? What are you getting at, Terry?" "How safe is this place?" "It's not. There's a reason everyone else left." "Then can't we leave too?" "You're welcome to try it, but no. Once you signed a contract, you signed yourself away to the Institute. You belong to the beholding now. The only way out is by blinding yourself. That's what happened to the last archivist. That's why everyone could leave." "The beholding? So we're trapped here?" "Yes. Why didn't you leave?" "I thought I could save John's replacement from the torment that comes with this job. Turns out I got promoted instead. Trust me, I do not want to be here." "I see. So what will you do with this information?" "For now, nothing. It doesn't seem like there's anything I can do. I'm not willing to blind myself over working here." "Then why ask?" "I suppose I just wanted to know." "Knowledge for knowledge's sake. You'll fit in here just fine. Now then, please take this box of statements and put them in chronological order and file them into the correct spots." Oh, right, I can do that." "That is why we hired you, though I suppose it's also because you jumped at the job." Martin let out a humorless chuckle, turning back to his statement. He'd been ready to press the button to record when Terry stopped in the door. "Martin, with all that happens in the archives, aren't you ever scared of being here?" Martin paused and took a deep breath before looking up at Terry. He was more perceptive than he had initially thought. All the time. Sorry, water break. It's been days, Elias. You haven't tried to market with anything. I thought you said you had something in mind. I do. Just be patient, Peter. All good things to those who wait. Not all of us are immortal, dearest. I'm not immortal, and you know it, but point taken. So when do we make our move? Soon. I just need to call in a favor from a friend of mine. Peter situated himself behind Elias's chair, draping himself over the back like a lazy house cat. He knew Elias hated that. Peter, please, I'm trying to get some work done. You're always working. Maybe I want your attention for a bit. Elias let out a heavy sigh. Clearly he wasn't getting any more of his paperwork done tonight. He stood and patted the chair, waiting for Peter to sit down before he climbed into his lap, straddling the larger male. Tell me about your plans. What fear marks do you have lined up for him? I can't tell you all the details, Peter. Where's the fun in that? But I can tell you that I have plans for the vast, and I see something promising coming for the buried, too. Be patient. You'll see everything in due time. You enjoy being in power far too much, dear husband. And you love seeing me in power. Elias ground his hips down against Peter and resigned himself to the knowledge that he would be picking up papers later. But right now, he was perfectly willing to have Peter slamming him back onto the desk for a little late-night office romp. It was good to be in charge.